Buddy, put that thing back in its holster. We haven't gone anywhere.
I don't understand.
Check out the MichaelDukesShow.com for information on how to get access to the podcast.
Welcome to the party, pal.
The Michael Dukes Show.
The greed and the entitlement is astounding to me.
What more could you want from a low-budget radio program?
This is a dumpster fire.
That was just BS.
It is time to get a new perspective.
We know just what you need, and we've got just the cure. Open wide and prepare for a steaming hot cup of freedom.
I just don't fathom it.
The Michael Dukes Show, streaming live across the world.
Broadcasting across the state of Alaska on this, your favorite radio station and or translator. And around the world at MichaelDukesShow.com on the internet. Good morning and welcome to it. It is the Michael Dukes Show. And we've got your Thursday edition of Stuff and Things. Stuff, Lori, and things. That's what we've got going on here on the broadcast today. Lots of good discussion, and I hope that you are buckled up and ready to go this morning. We're going to start off here with a few headlines, just talk about some of the things that's happening here around the state, and then we're going to dive into it with Dr. JH Snider PhD, who's going to come in and talk to us about the Constitutional Convention. Now, he's a national fellow who is the editor of the State Constitutional Convention Clearinghouse. That's a project that focuses on the most difficult areas of reform, basically where elected officials have a conflict of interest in bringing about reforms that might reduce their own power. And I am definitely looking forward to hearing what he has to say this morning. We're going to talk with him about all the ins and outs of that, and hopefully we'll get some good insights, specifically into what the process is, and what are the risks, and how does it work? I mean, how can and if it can be improved? I guess that'll be the other thing that we should talk about. So we're gonna deal with that, and We'll jump into all that here in just a few moments. We'll be talking with him about that then. In hour 2 of the program, we're going to talk with Kathy Henslee, who is the candidate for Municipal Assembly District 4 down in Anchorage. And as I said previously, or as I have said previously, many of you would be like, well, I don't live in Anchorage. Why do I care? Well, because, I got to tell you, you best be paying attention to what's going on in Anchorage, because as goes Anchorage, so the rest of the state has a tendency to go. So that's kind of the direction that things are happening there. So we're going to talk with Kathy Henslee in hour 2 of the program. So Dr. Snider, Kathy Henslee, full boat today, full show, full stop. That's all the stuff that we're going to be dealing with here. So, let's hit the headlines and talk about a few things. First and foremost, have you noticed the gas prices? I mean, I filled up yesterday. I filled up my car, and it's got a pretty small tank on it. But even it's like 11 gallons, and it was $60, right? I mean, it was brutal. I can't imagine you poor guys who are out there driving those big trucks with 30-gallon tanks in it, what it must be like. I mean, I saw a comment from somebody yesterday on Facebook that said, geez, thanks. Cut off. I mean, because it's got, most of those pumps have got a cutoff where they stop at $125 or something. He goes, cut off, and I'm just barely 3/4 full. Having to run the cart again. I mean, it's going to be tough, but it's going to be even tougher for our kith and kin out in the bush, out in the villages. There's an article from KTUU, Alaska's news source here yesterday. Yeah, yesterday. And it was talking about what's coming. This is, there's a lot of factors at play here. We've got inflation. We've got the, oil prices were already on the rise, and now we've got the president's position to stop importing Russian oil. And that is all leading to something that is just not looking good. Back on March 1st, Mike Poston, who is the director of sales at Vitus Energy, said that crude oil prices at that time, that was on March the 1st, were already up 50% higher than they were in June of last year. And he said at that time that the market should plan for an increase in energy prices well over $1.50 a gallon higher than last fall. And then 8 days later, Vitus said there was already been another increase of 54 cents to the price of a gallon of gasoline and diesel. So you're talking about a $2 increase over where it was last fall. So, yeah, I mean, we're already seeing $7+ a gallon gasoline in California and in some of the other higher areas. Now, that, of course, includes that some of these places have got, ludicrous amounts of fuel tax and other things. But when you're seeing $7 and, $7.61 a gallon or something for standard fuel, let alone for premium or something like that, it definitely becomes worrying. Yesterday, I was at the pump, and I snapped a picture of it. $5.49 a gallon for my car has a turbocharger on it, so I have to run Supreme in my car. $5.49 a gallon, and it's just going up from here, my friends. Just going up from here. So those of us who do a lot of driving and commuting, it's going to hit our pocketbooks. But those folks in the villages, they're talking about right now. According to Shaktoolik Native Corporation, they said that gasoline in Shaktoolik was already selling for $4.96 a gallon with tax. And he said the way projections are going, I would say you could just about double that. And for other communities, it means that their power bills could go up by another 50%. Which, this whole thing always seems kind of ironic to me. We live in a state that is just flush with energy resources, oil and natural gas, and yet we are the ones that seem to get pegged every time something like this happens. The state benefits because the oil prices skyrocket, and the citizens who are the owners of the resource seem to take it, they get the sticky end of the shaft, so to speak. It's just crazy. And of course, exactly when you get down to the end of it, they mentioned the House is debating whether to pay the $1,300 energy relief check, when what you should be talking about is how do we get them their $4,200 per person dividend. That would definitely offset a lot of the cost of this, instead of a $1,250 dividend plus the $1,300 energy relief check, which is, again, still half of what a full PFD should be. And in fact, Governor Dunleavy is quoted to say, look, he said, the PFD is the best way to disperse relief. I couldn't agree more, right? I could not agree more. Of course, the politicians can't see it because they just do not want to give up they got their hand in the piggy bank. They got their hand in the cookie jar, and they do not want to let go. You remember the old story about the monkey who sticks his hand in the jar where the orange is, and he can't get his hand out because his hand is too big for but he's not willing to let go of the orange, and so it's just this kind of, that's exactly what it's like. The legislature's got their hand on that orange, and they do not want to let it go. They could get their hand out of there if they wanted to, but they just don't want to let it go. That's what it's looking like right now. So, that's like the biggest story going. That's the thing that's going to hit us and affect us most coming into this summer. And then, of course, going into we have no idea what's going to be happening next winter. You poor folks who have to depend on heating oil. How much is heating oil going to be? $7 a gallon? I mean, 6, 7? I mean, I don't know. I don't even know. But it blows my mind. I remember when I first filled up my tank, the first time when we bought our house, man, this has been 15 years ago, up in Fairbanks, and, I paid whatever I paid. I think I paid 96 cents a gallon or something for heating oil at the time. Look at us now. How do you fill up a 1,000-gallon heating tank when it's $6 or $7 a gallon? Well, I guess that's what you use your PFD for, right? Maybe not. All right, we're going to get into that, but I do want to mention one of our fine sponsors on the program. Now, look, if you know me, you know that I'm a guy that, ready for anything is kind of my motto. If I had if I was like in a Game of Thrones thing where I had my own house and everything, the motto would be ready for anything. I'm always trying to be prepared for the worst eventuality of any kind, just in case. And that's one of the reasons why I have a Bivy Stick. Bivy Stick is a small, tiny little device that about half the size of your cell phone that you connect to your cell phone via Bluetooth. You download the app, and you can connect the two, and it turns your cell phone into a satellite communications device, which means anywhere you could see the sky, you can send a text message. You can send an email. You can drop a pin to your friends and relatives and people who are following you. Somebody could have had a Bivy Stick out on the Iditarod, and they could have been, dropping pins so you could keep track of them all along the way. But also in an emergency situation, you could push a button and say, "Help me! I'm hurt or I need something." You could push it's got a check-in button that says everything's fine, all's well. Here's where I am, and you can get all that for $199. No activation fees. They've got plans that start as low as $14 a month. With rollover, so any unused credits that you don't use, you can roll them over to the next month. They've got their unlimited plan, which is the one I'm on, is $45 a month. And it is just an amazing little device. You got disasters, you got cell phone towers down, earthquakes, tornadoes, zombie apocalypse, whatever. You've got it. You got cellular congestion. Maybe it's just something's going on and everybody's trying to dial everybody at once. You don't have to worry about it because you're on the Iridium satellite network. You are talking directly to your people. I'm buying my wife one to put it in the glove box of her car so that she can just pull it out at any time. If there's some kind of emergency, turn it on. It'll last for 5 days of continuous usage on a single charge, by the way. And send me a text or send me an email and tell me what's happening. Make sure she's okay. And they're always rolling out new features. They've always got new features. They're going to be talking about this thing in a few days. It's called Group Track. I'm not going to tell you anything else about it other than it's a cool feature, and you're going to want to know more about it. So it doesn't matter if you are a hunter or a fisherman, a snow machiner, a doctor, a tow truck driver, an Avon lady, soccer mom, whatever it is that you do, you could benefit from having a Bivy Stick in your kit, whether it's your emergency kit in your car or just sitting in the bottom of your purse. I just carry mine around in the pocket of my coat just in case I need it. $199, you don't get that peace of mind from anything else. The Bivy Stick, you can find out more over at satellitewest.com, or you can go to one of their local dealers, including Arctic Fire and Safety in Fairbanks, South Central Radar on the Spit in Homer, Radar Alaska in Kodiak, Communications North in Seward, Lundy Marine Electronics in Dutch Harbor, and Safe and Sound in Wasilla, Anchorage, or Soldotna, any of the 3 Safe and Sound locations. Check them out. Bivy Sticks. Tell them thank you for sponsoring the program. We appreciate you guys being part of it. All right. We've got, in just a second, we're going to be talking with Dr. JH Snider about the ConCon and what does that mean for Alaskans. And then we will pick things up with Kathy Henslee at the second hour mark. That's it. Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. We'll be back with more and Dr. JH Snider on the ConCon right after this.
Our light, our guide. and our trusted friend.
Michael Duke Show.
Okay. Wow. How you guys doing? You ready to go? You ready to do your thing? Good. I am going to get Dr. Snider on the program. We'll see if we can get things ready to go on here. If you want to give me just 1 second to do this, we'll get everything put together. I'm waiting for the phone to ring. Maybe I didn't dial enough numbers. No, it didn't even ring. Didn't even ring. Went right to voicemail. That's never a good sign. We'll try it again here in just a hot second. Okay. What else? Too bad. Let's see, price gouging is already starting in the bush when you're 135 miles above Bethel on a frozen river. Your fuel prices jump. You know it's time for the state to put the state regulators out here and keep an eye on the monopoly fuel supplier. Is it made by Pivotal? No, it's made by ACR. Bill is asking, is the thing made by Pivotal? No, it's made by ACR. Dan says heating oil yesterday in Fairbanks was $3.97 a gallon. Ooh, you better fill up now. That's what I'm saying. You better fill up now. It's gonna be a thing. It's going to be a thing. You want to save yourself some heartache. Now's the time to do it. Because I can just imagine. I mean, like I said, I'm literally looking at the picture from the gas pump yesterday. $5.49 a gallon. So, $3.97 seems like a pretty good price right now. So, we'll see what happens. Oh man. Okay. What else is going on? Good morning. The PFD is raking in cash. We're about to have a ludicrous tax on gas thanks to the legislature. Maybe the people in the bush will start to question whether their legislators are representing them by stealing their PFD. This is exactly why the PFD is important. I would agree with that. I would agree, Ken. Chris says the problem is the government wants your PFD. Again, the monkey and the orange. Remember that. The problem is the legislature has control over the PFD. They have shown time and again that they can't be trusted. Let's see. Russian oil exports are only 3% to the USA. It's actually 8%, but you're right, and we don't really take any of the Russian exports here in Alaska. Fuel for North Pole has jumped roughly $1.50 over the last 2 weeks, says Jeremy. $5.29 a gallon for diesel is killing my bank account. Yeah, I could see that for sure. All right, let me see if I can get Dr. Snider on the phone. Dum 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 dum. Dr. Snider, it's Michael Duke's calling. Are you? Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You ready? All right, welcome back to the program. We're about to rejoin the radio. We're about 60 seconds out from rejoining from the commercial break. Joining us on the line right now is Dr. JH Snider, National Fellow with the State Constitutional Convention, National Fellow, rather, from the Harvard School of Government and editor of the State Constitutional Convention Clearinghouse. He joins us this morning to talk a little bit about the Constitutional Convention, the process, how it works, the pros and the cons, the ups and downs of it, and how he thinks it could be one of the most powerful forces in our form of government. And I'm kind of excited to talk with him about it. We're about to jump back on Dr. Snider, so hold the line, and we'll be to you here in just a hot second. Do me a favor, folks. Please like and share this video. If you're on Facebook, you can like and share. If you're on YouTube, you can share, and you can also subscribe and ring the bell. Don't forget, we need more folks involved in this conversation, so let's all be part of it, shall we? Jumping back into it, the Michael Duke Show, Common Sense Radio. Here we go. Broadcasting live across the state of Alaska on this, your favorite radio station and or translator, and around the world at MichaelDukeShow.com, on the interwebs, on a variety of outlets, YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, the own stream over at MichaelDukeShow.com. That's right, you can find us everywhere. We're about to jump into it here and start talking about the Constitutional Convention, and you've heard some of my concerns, some of my worries about what could possibly happen there. And we're going to talk about that, and we're going to discuss kind of the process, because I don't think many of us know or understand the full process as well. Joining us on the program this morning is Dr. JH Snider. He's a national fellow from the Harvard School of Government and editor of the State Constitutional Convention Clearinghouse. That's a project that of public policy that focuses on the most difficult areas of democratic reform, basically, as I was talking about earlier with the monkey and the orange in the jar, where elected officials have a conflict of interest in bringing about reforms where they might reduce their own power. Holy gasp, that couldn't possibly happen. Dr. Snider joins us this morning to discuss this and the Constitutional Convention. Good morning, Doctor. Thanks for coming on board.
Hi. I thought I should start by explaining the process, because there's a lot of confusion about the process.
Sure. Let's start there. I think that's a good kicking off point.
So a key feature of the process is there's 3 votes for the public. The first vote is the one that's coming up this November, which is the vote on whether to call a constitutional convention. The second vote for the public is on electing the delegates to the convention. And the third vote is on whether all a convention does is propose possible amendments to the Constitution. And the third vote is whether to approve or disapprove of a convention. The key feature that differs between legislative-initiated amendments and convention-initiated amendments is that the convention, rather than the legislature, proposes the amendments that then have to be voted up or down by the public. And that's an important distinction to keep in mind, because opponents of the convention will typically pretend that a convention not only proposes but ratifies or approves their own recommendations. So that's important. And then this gets to the question, well, why bother having a convention do the proposing rather than the legislature? After all, it's less expensive to have the legislature do it, so let's have them do it. But the key feature to understand is that this, like the constitutional initiative, is a legislative bypass mechanism. So you want to have a different body proposing amendments for certain types of amendments. And if I could just get into a little bit of constitutional theory, which most Americans don't get at all. When people talk about constitutions, they often say, a constitution is more fundamental law that makes it harder to that's harder to change than ordinary laws. But that misses really a key point about why we have constitutions. Constitutions are the people's law. They are. We do not want to have the constituted powers. That's the legislative, executive, and judicial branch designing their own powers. With constitutional law, we want it to be above constituted powers. We want the constituent power, the people, to have control over the process. And that's why the people not only ratify anything that's proposed to change a constitution, but should have proposal power. And that goes back to the 1770s in Massachusetts, when the institution was invented. In all new states, and until the middle of the 19th century, most amendments were actually passed through this mechanism. Then the one we're all familiar with, legislative-initiated amendments came in because they're less expensive, more convenient. But there's still this fundamental purpose, and that's the contemporary democratic function of this institution is largely as a legislative bypass mechanism. I would argue it's also more deliberative than the initiative approach. But I think the core one for Alaska would be, if you're going to call one, it's because it's a legislative bypasses.
Right. Well, and I think that's one of the major points. I mean, in in one of your bios there, again, it talks about elected officials having this conflict of interest in bringing about reforms that reduce their own power. And that's really, again, that is the most powerful part about a constitutional convention is legislators don't want to give up their own power. They don't want to take their hand off the tiller. Sometimes people need to jump around the line and, and go over their head, so to speak. And this is the mechanism by which that happens every 10 years in these various states around the country.
Yeah. Now, I'd like to make a caveat, which is that a statehood constitutional convention is a little bit different. There, it's actually a statehood constitutional convention is a bit of a power grab for legislators and other constitutional powers because, instead of a colonial power, an outside entity controlling your affairs, you're controlling them yourself. So actually, the legislature is empowered with a statehood constitutional convention. So the politics are quite different. But as soon as they have that power, legislators, turn against the institution, as well as any special interest that by definition excels at influencing the legislature. They view this as a very risky thing. They've invested in their relationships with the legislature, and they'll of course oppose a constitutional convention. And that's whether on the left or the right. And same with the legislature. They're going to oppose it
right.
because it's not in their power interest.
You talked about the 3 votes that we have. Can you break down the process here in the state of Alaska? So, I mean, if we vote for the Constitutional Convention in November, what is the process then next? I mean, then so walk us through it from start to finish, essentially.
Well, there some concerns are raised. The typical approach to a constitutional convention is you elect delegates like you elect legislatures, but you're not supposed to elect elected public officials because that's a conflict of interest. Now, that wasn't completely the way Alaska did it in the 1950s. They allowed legislatures to serve on the statehood constitutional convention. But ideally, as other states have done it, and Alaska should do it, they should be prevented. There is a clause that if the legislature doesn't pass enabling legislation, it should default to the mechanism used to elect the delegates to Hawaii's 1955-1956 constitutional convention. And that's a problem in my judgment because that will those rules really are no longer valid in today's day and age. One person, one vote hadn't been implemented by the Supreme Court at that time. So I think it is potentially a problem. But the basic idea is that a convention delegates should be elected similarly to legislative delegates. And why this still preserves the purpose of a constitutional convention is that you do not want delegates designing offices that they will then inhabit.
Right.
The idea is that delegates are designing reforms that won't affect them because they'll have to leave their office before they're implemented. So that fundamental conflict of interest doesn't pertain to delegates. So it's not, it preserves the key function of the Constitutional Convention to be elected like legislators if those folks are not designing the offices that they currently occupy.
Are they elected by district? Is that how it works, by current voting districts? Is that how it comes out?
Well, in theory, the legislature could do whatever it wanted. My hunch is that the legislature would find an excuse to stalemate and not pass it. That's why they had that default measure of going back to 1955 and 1956. So you don't have clear rules. You've got a collective body, and they just have to pretend not to get something done for it not to happen. So it could very well go to the courts.
Right. Well, let's suppose that for some reason that the delegates do get installed. Then they would what? They would convene. They would discuss the measures and the changes that they would like to see to the Constitution. They would agree on that.
Well,
I'm assuming.
Yeah, that's right. In 1955, 56, they met for 75 days and proposed a constitution. Now, what I like about the Alaskan delegates is not that they were geniuses or statesmen, but they had humility. They were willing to learn from what others had done. Basically, the way most constitutional conventions work is they collect a whole bunch of different constitutions from other states, and then they cut and paste. They might add a few details, but the willingness to learn, I think, is the key feature, and that's what those folks were. They brought in outside consultants that proposed. The model constitution Alaska picked was from the National Municipal League very closely. They stuck closely. The top consultant was the vice president of the league. They brought in this consulting firm from Chicago with a lot of expertise in this matter, and they drafted many of the proposals. They were very active. They did pretend that those folks weren't as involved as they were. They were not allowed to mention the name of the consultants during any of their events. They would not, at their many public hearings, they would not allow the consultants to speak. But it was that sense of humility that I think distinguished the Alaskan delegates.
Right.
They were willing to learn,
right,
as opposed to being full of self-confidence that they knew all the answers and whatnot. And it's very hard in such a short time to become an expert on these matters.
So once they did come together and they decided whatever change or whatever modifications needs to be done, then it's not, as you mentioned earlier, it's not ratification, right? Because then it needs to be voted on by the people as a change in and of itself. Is that correct?
Yeah. Now, they actually proposed three items at that convention. The one that's most famous and best known is the Constitution itself. They also proposed something called the Tennessee Plan, which was their clever approach to elect representatives and senators for Alaska, even though Congress hadn't approved that. And they went to Congress and actually were effective in helping them win statehood. So they put that on the ballot as a separate measure that won, and then they had one on state fisheries that they put on the ballot as well. But anyway, yeah, that's the basic setup.
Well, so let's talk about, again, a couple more of the mechanics, the timing of it. How long does something like this take normally? I mean, historically in other states and things like that, how much would theoretically something like this take, and how much would it cost?
Well, the duration is a bit of a wild card. There are many of the early constitutional conventions setting up states in the early 19th century. There were a bunch of farmers that came together. They cut and pasted constitutions from other states, and they were done in 15 days. And the whole thing, remember, under the Northwest Ordinance, you only need 60,000 people to become a state. I mean, it's such a different world. Alaska thinks of itself as small, but even in 1956 or 7, it was giant compared to many early American states. Because I think it had a population of about 220,000,
right,
which is 3.5 times what the minimum was required. But most modern constitutional conventions, take longer, and the public typically gets upset in the press the longer they go. So it's pretty hard to predict. Here, it's hard to imagine that they would propose a new constitution. They would propose a bunch of amendments. That would be the function.
Right.
That's a judgment call. So I can't answer that question, but I know the cost issue will be highly publicized, especially if it's at all close in the month before the opponents. That will be one of several arguments that they will hammer on.
Right.
That you could spend on all that money on other things that would really help Alaskans.
Sure.
It's just a waste of money. So that's going to be, because people can understand money, and cost. The numbers they will use will be highly flawed. The press typically won't go into the details. There's an Alaskan senator that has already put out a position paper for the no folks. I'm sure his numbers, which are just, it's an awful, highly subjective. It's a classic. You have the legitimacy of Alaskan senator putting this thing together that looks somewhat official, and then you go through and you see, all the assumptions all skewed in a certain way.
Right.
And then, of course, there's the question of what is the cost of not having a convention,
right,
which is never addressed. If you ask the average American how much government wastes, for example, they'll tell you like 30 to 40% of government expenditures are wasted. If a convention even reduced government waste by a fraction of a percent or 1%, let's say, there would be an incredible return on investment.
Right.
So,
the lost opportunity cost definitely factor into that. We're talking with Dr.
Yeah, anyway, that won't be part of the discussion. The opponents, which will control the advertising and whatnot, just based on what's been going on for the last 20 years or so.
Right. Dr. JH Snider is our guest. Again, he's a national fellow with the Harvard Kennedy School of Government and an editor of the State Constitutional Convention Clearinghouse. We're talking about the potential for a state constitutional convention here in Alaska. We have to take a quick commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to talk with him more about the difference between a limited and an unlimited convention, and then maybe some of the potential pitfalls of the convention, including some of my own fears. We'll talk about that here in just a moment. The Michael Duke Show continues with Dr. JH Snider and the Constitutional Convention. That's up next. Don't go anywhere. Back with more right after this.
If you missed the show, you can listen to it on your time with Dukes On Demand. Oh, and it's free. Like America used to be. Streaming live every weekday morning on Facebook Live and MichaelDukesShow.com.
Okay, we're in the commercial break right now, waiting to rejoin the radio. We're still on with our friends here on Facebook and YouTube and everything else, 50, 60 different people hanging out with us. Doctor, we'd like to change gears just a little bit during the commercial break so we don't repeat ourselves too much. But can you tell us a little bit about the State Constitutional Convention Clearinghouse? Tell us about this project and what you're trying to accomplish there.
Well, there's 14 states with this institution, and the level of ignorance about how this process works, its history, and how it compares to other constitutional convention processes is great. There was, during much of the 20th century, there was an institution called the National Municipal League that provided, I think, similar functions. They had except was much larger and more substantial than the clearinghouse I put together. They looked at all the states with constitutional conventions and issued a bunch of reports and had consultants. And as I mentioned, one of their top consultants was very influential in Alaska and in other states in the early, mid-20th century. And I've been trying to provide some of this missing information. When you take, introductory American government, you don't learn anything about America's state constitutional convention history. The average state has had 5 of these. Alaska has only had 1.
Right.
There's been about 235 in American history, and people just don't understand the process. So there's tremendous interest in the ballot initiative in the Democratic reform community,
right?
Because that's really the only place to get major reforms done. But there's been very little interest or expertise in this issue. So I saw a gap there that I thought I could help fill.
Yeah, I mean, you're on record as saying that basically periodic state constitutional conventions are pretty much vital to the continuation of the republic, and yet it's been neglected. I mean, people don't really talk about it. As you said, most people don't understand. We see it on the ballot every 10 years, yet we don't understand what its necessary function is.
Exactly. One of the things that I'm most concerned about is the on the ballot pamphlet that Alaska puts out with the pro and con positions. I think it's been very weak the last two times in 2012 and 2002. And I'm hoping there'll be a movement to force a better statement on the pro side, because I thought it was so weak. It wasn't a matter of ill intent, which it is in some other states. It was just a matter of somebody really not understanding the history and purpose of the institution and just listing a smorgasbord of things that a convention could do without explaining why you'd want a convention rather than the legislature proposing certain types of amendments. And I very much hope there's somebody listening that might take an interest in making sure that that's going to be the major statement that people see. There's going to be no organized yes campaign with any resources. There'll be a very active no campaign. That document goes to every Alaskan household, and it should be have a reasonable description of why Alaska currently has that, what the function of that institution is. It'll be hard to get that in there, but I think I think that would be helpful if anybody wants to take that task on.
Well, and I think you're right. Again, not to beat a dead horse or anything, but you continually going back to that idea that somehow elected officials might do something to reduce their own power. That's not within their. I mean, it's human nature. That's not within their interest. And so they're going to be we're already seeing it here in the state of Alaska, this active anti-constitutional convention sentiment. You mentioned the letters. We're seeing people already starting to gear up and gather money. And to some people, that's an indication that maybe this might be a good thing. If it makes some of these politicians nervous, then maybe it's a good thing. Is that kind of what you're advocating here for?
Well, yeah, except there'll be an overwhelming coalition that comes together and will really come out usually the month before if they think there's a chance of passing. It will include the legislatures usually work behind the scenes, and the most powerful special interest groups often they'll certainly mobilize their members, and they'll put together a very impressive coalition of who's who to oppose it. So they will be the insiders, and they typically are very influential with the public. It usually doesn't come to that point because the public is confused, doesn't understand, doesn't want to take a risk. Most Americans worship the national constitution. It's hard to believe, but about a half Americans don't even know they have a state constitution. When they look at the item on the ballot, they'll often be confused and think they're asking about the National Constitution Convention.
Right.
The level of ignorance is just
it's
astounding.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, and again, even somebody who's as plugged in as me, I have to admit that I don't even understand the whole process, although I understand the importance of it. We're going to continue here with Dr. JH Snider. We're about to jump back onto the radio here with him. Folks, please like and share this video if you'd like more people to understand the importance of a constitutional convention. This is their master class in what's going on here. We're going to get that discussion and continue it with Dr. Snider here in just a moment. The Michael Duke Show, Common Sense Radio. All right, we're continuing now with Dr. J.H. Snider, who is a fellow at the Harvard School of Business and also the editor of the State Constitutional Convention Clearinghouse. He's got a website talking about the Alaska Constitutional Convention. You can go to alaska.concon.info for the clearinghouse information on that. Before we went to break, we were talking a little bit about some of the differences in a limited convention versus an unlimited convention. What are the risks, Doctor, of the unlimited convention versus something that's on a single purview line? Give us the details here.
Yeah, I'll just a second. I just wanted to clarify that I have been a fellow at the Kennedy School, the Shorenstein Center there, and the Edmund Safra Center for Ethics at Harvard. And I was a nonprofit fellow when I was younger at the Harvard Business School, but I'm not currently a fellow, but I have been. Now, in terms of limited versus unlimited, from my perspective, the whole function of a constitutional convention, it has to be unlimited, because a limited convention means that the legislature can limit it. And if the legislature can limit it, it defies the whole purpose of a convention. So a convention is limited by the fact that all it can do is propose things. It can't ratify them. So it's limited. The so-called unlimited convention is really limited by the public, just like the legislature can propose anything it wants for a constitutional amendment, and we don't call them an unlimited, but they are unlimited.
Right.
But they're limited in the same way by the voters. And even if the voters pass things, a state constitution can't pass anything that violates any type of federal law, constitutional, statutory, regulatory. So it has quite limited powers. I mean, the Bill of Rights at the national level, the First Amendment, all those are untouchable by a state constitutional convention. And if you look at other democratic institutions, look, the Supreme Court, in theory, it could do anything. It says it's limited by the text or the original purpose or whatever the theory is, but actually, more than a constitutional convention, they could do whatever they want. President Wilson famously said the Supreme Court was the sitting constitutional convention, and one with unlimited powers because it doesn't have to face a vote. It's an institution for life. So this is a highly politicized term. It will be raised all the time to raise fears of a runaway, a limited convention that's going to take basic rights, and the average person is going to buy into that argument.
Right.
And there's not going to be a thoughtful discussion of why it's essential this institution not be limited by the legislature if it's to fulfill its function.
Right.
And what sense other democratic institutions, including the legislature, has unlimited power in the exact same sense, which is, again, the legislature can propose whatever it wants, but the checks and balance mechanism in both cases is the public.
Right. Dr. JH Snider, our guest. My main concern, again, without getting into the details of any of the policies, because you're here just to basically talk with us about the mechanisms, not the pros or cons of any proposed changes. But my fear has always been in looking at this constitutional convention. I understand the mechanism of it. I understand the appeal of it. But my fear is, okay, well, maybe my side could get in the things that we want to change, whatever it is, PFD or whatever. But my underlying fear is that if we open it up, we saw what happened in Alaska with the ballot measure number 2, where they brought in the ranked choice voting and all these other things. All this outside money and influence came in and influenced the people of Alaska to pick this kind of new type of voting system and everything else. And they used words like Alaska's a cheap date because we can pour a lot of money into it, or a little bit of money, and affect a lot of people. And so my fear, and maybe it's unreasonable, maybe you can justify it for me, is that by opening it up, we may not just change the things that we want to change, but that others could come in and make radical changes to the Constitution as well. How would you answer that and allay those fears?
Well, the way Constitutional Convention politics works, and if you're familiar with politics, you can spin everything in a certain direction. Everybody has the sense that they're going to come out a loser. So if you're in the majority, you feel that you're solidly in the majority, you'll say, well, why should I have a Constitutional Convention? I already have a majority. If I want something passed, I can get it through the legislature, so I don't need it. And if you're in the minority, you're going to say, oh, I'm going to be in the minority, so I'm going to lose out in a convention, and the other folks are going to get it. The liberals say the conservatives are going to win. The conservatives say the liberals, all the elites representing and feeding these arguments is going to say the other side is going to win. And each side is going to focus. Almost everybody has some part of some special interest, and all the groups that they will belong to will say that they might lose something that they care about.
Right.
And so that gives you a little flavor of that. And then we live in this era where people give lip service to democracy, but don't really believe it. Americans have such contempt increasingly for their fellow Americans. Americans, whether they're in the majority or minority increasingly feel that they're in the minority. And it's really, Pew Research has, done polls on this. It's quite surprising. It's just like people often feel that crime rates are much different than they are. But I'm not talking about recently. I'm talking about over a period of 4 or 5 decades. Because, if it bleeds, it leads in the press. That's what gets interest. And so people have a distorted sense of crime because media is interested in anecdotes, not deep trends and whatnot. Sometimes they correspond to deep trends. Anyway, there's a lot of that here. Almost everybody is told they're going to be a loser, and that's if they have a convention. The whole notion of how they might be a winner, which is to pass some things that can't otherwise get through the legislature, that's going to be ignored. So yes, everything, there's risk and trade-offs in absolutely everything. And what I'm trying to do is to highlight the function of the institution, which is to solve a very particular type of problem. But many people are going to focus, I can lose something. Well, you can lose something in the legislature, too.
Right.
And the legislature, has basically similar powers. But it's a clever and it's been a very effective framing to attack the constitutional convention.
We're down to the last 90 seconds here or so. So, Dr. Snider, what's your exhortation to the listeners? What should they be doing? Should they be educating themselves? Should they be voting in favor? What is your thoughts here?
Well, I'm asking them to educate themselves and not rely on their normal sources from either party, because the insiders are just going to be against it. And I would encourage, if anybody can help get the Lieutenant Governor, Secretary of State to improve the pamphlet that will be sent out to all Alaskans on the pro and negative reasons for holding a convention. That needs to be improved. There needs to be some political pressure to have a reasonable yes statement. And I think it's been very poor in 2012 and 2002. It was last on the ballot. And that's something everybody's going to see.
Yeah.
That would be a valuable activity if anybody is willing to engage.
Maybe we can talk somebody into getting you to write the pro side of that. Dr. JH Snider, our guest, again, author, alaska.concon.info. Doctor, thank you for coming on board with us this morning and explaining this to us. Hold the line for just 1 second, Doctor. We're going to be back with more Hour 2 dead ahead, The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. All right, Doctor, I wanted to give you, we're in the commercial break here at the top of the hour, so I wanted to give you one final bite at the apple, just, your final thoughts here, where we're not constrained by the clock on what we could do. I mean, I would love to have you write the pro side if we could find somebody if we could find whoever's in charge of that in the Lieutenant Governor's office to allow that to happen. It would be good to have somebody with your background be able to write something like that. But I wanted to give you the last couple minutes here to just give us your final thoughts.
I have a website, the Alaska State Constitutional Convention Clearinghouse. I try to put everything that's published on there, pro and con. So I would encourage people who want to stay up on what the various media and groups have been saying about the convention to look at that. Most of the material won't come up until the fall and probably the month before, when there tends to be the election, when it's a blizzard of material. And I will also put up in the fall a frequently asked question sections to deal with many of the issues we've touched on during the conversation today. So I would encourage you, especially in the fall, to look at that website to be educated on the arguments pro and con.
Has there been a state that's done this recently, Doctor? I mean, it's every 10 years, I'm assuming, with the census. So what was that? I mean, has there been states in the last cycle that did this and came away as, with a positive, example of what's going on?
Well, we're in the greatest drought of state constitutional conventions in American history. There's never been anything like it. I wrote an article in Journal of American Political Thought explaining why I think that has happened. The last two of note, which I think were quite successful, were Rhode Island and New Hampshire in the 1980s. New Hampshire has had, depending upon how you define a constitutional convention, 16 or 17 since the American founding. In fact, the only way to change New Hampshire's constitution until 1964 was through a constitutional convention. It was their general purpose mechanism for change, and I don't see people denouncing. They just think of it as just a way to conduct government. It's not this giant ordeal that it's made out to be. The funny thing is they have 400 members of their legislature. Their constitutional convention body is the same. It's quite a big thing. So anyway, I guess there's been a lot of successful and some not so successful constitutional conventions. I will say that all of the most recent ones, they claim they're a model constitution. Like Montana, in the last few weeks, has had this big celebration of their 60th their 50th anniversary since their 1972 Constitutional Convention. I think that's a better constitution than Alaska. If Alaska were to have another Constitutional Convention, I'd look to Montana's Constitution, which has a lot. They also use the National Municipal League's model Constitution as a reference point. But I think, and they've had all sorts of celebrations about that. You can look it up in the media, how proud they are of all the things they've done. Alaska sort of talks the same way about its 1950s Constitutional Convention, but I think I would point to that one and all the celebrations about it. And they still have a bunch of people that are alive. Alaska only has one person left from its original Constitutional Convention. So I point to that one.
I think it's good to be able to have examples of how it works out and when it works out well. Dr. JH Snider, thank you for coming on board this morning and sharing your insight with us. We appreciate getting a little bit of a peek behind the scenes. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay. Good luck. And don't forget that website for further information.
Yep. I've already put it up a couple times, alaska.concon.info. It's up on the screen as well, folks, for those of you who are looking at it. Thank you, Doctor. Appreciate it.
Great. Good luck.
Dr. J.H. Snider, our guest here on the program this morning, talking about the Constitutional Convention. Deshana said, in other words, prepare for serious battle. Is that what everyone is hearing? Yeah, I mean, I think we're already hearing it. I mean, this is what Mike Shower was talking about yesterday when he said, just look at the people who are opposed to it and use that as a measuring stick as to whether or not you should support it. I've been hesitant. I've been hesitant to come out about this and jump up and down and say that I'm for it because of it. But I'm swayed. I am swayed. I think that this is really the only chance of fixing what is fundamentally flawed right now in the state government, and that is with a constitutional convention. I think we're going to have to. I think we're going to have to take that chance. And we do need to educate. We do need to educate people a lot more than we have here in the past. So, looking forward to it. We'll have to see. We'll have to see what comes out of this. But I still have my reservations. But I'm ready to. I'm ready to take that chance. Personally, I'm ready to take that chance. So I guess we'll see where it goes from here. All right. What else have we got going on here? Anything else? Just checking the email. Okay, email's clear. Looking at the comments in the chat room. Just sent an email tool that reached 20,000 Alaskans. 800 supported the PFD and took 3 minutes to support the PFD with legislators. How old is Vic Fisher? Boy, he's got to be in his 90s. Let's see. Robbie says, me too. The risks of not are too great. Robbie is now in favor of a constitutional convention. If we don't do it now, says Terry, in 10 years, we won't have Alaska. And I really think that's part of it. This was something that was baked in to all these different things for the specific reason that they knew that legislators were going to glom, that politicians would glom power under themselves, and this is the way to strip that. So definitely an interesting take. All right, we're going to jump into this here in just a hot second. We got Kathy Henslee is going to be joining us, and we'll be talking with her here in just a moment. Don't go anywhere. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Let's do this thing.
Whoa, buddy. Put that thing back in its holster. We haven't gone anywhere.
I don't understand.
Check out the MichaelDukesShow.com for information on how to get access to the podcast.
Welcome to the party, pal.
The Michael Dukes Show.
The greed and the entitlement is astounding to me.
What more could you want from a low-budget radio program?
This is a dumpster fire.
That was just BS.
It is time to get a new perspective.
We know just what you need, and we've got just the cure. Open wide and prepare for a steaming hot cup of freedom.
I just don't fathom it.
The Michael Dukes Show, streaming live across the world.
Across the globe on the interwebs at MichaelDukesShow.com and across the state of Alaska on this, your favorite radio station and or translator. It is the Michael Duke Show, and we are continuing now with state business, just finishing up here a minute ago with Dr. JH Snider talking about the Constitutional Convention and why it is a necessary feature and why we should not have the fear of it that many people, including myself, have had about opening things up. That's an interesting conversation you can go back and catch on the podcast later on this morning after it gets uploaded. You can find the podcast on CastBox, Stitcher, Google Play, iTunes, Apple Podcasts, and, of course, Spotify. So go check it out and do it. Hour 2, though, now, and so let's change gears. We're going to pull back down into the South Central area and talk about what's going on. The municipal election in the city of Anchorage, the municipality of Anchorage, is coming up in less than 30 days. It's weird, I know. It always confused me when I first moved down to the South Central area that Anchorage holds their municipal elections in the spring. Kind of throws people for a loop, but it's a good opportunity. And for those of you who are listening in other areas, Fairbanks, Homer, etc., and saying, why do I care about what goes on in Anchorage? Well, because as goes Anchorage, so goes the rest of the state. I mean, in a lot of ways. And we've seen that in things that have happened in the assemblies and the community councils and the city councils and things like that. So we need to be paying close attention to us. Joining us this morning to discuss is Kathy Henslee. She's a lifelong Alaskan, married to an Air National Guard pilot. She's a realtor, runs several small businesses. She's got extensive community involvement, and she is here today to talk with us about her candidacy for the Municipal Assembly in Anchorage in District 4, and she joins us right now. Good morning, Kathy. Thanks for coming on board.
Good morning, Michael. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I appreciate you doing that. So, I think folks need to know a little bit more about Kathy Henslee. Who you are, where you come from, your background, and everything else. But I always like to start off with one question, and that is exactly when did you lose your mind? What was the? Was this one of those aha moments where it just suddenly came on you, or was it a one straw after another, and something finally broke the camel's back, and you said, "I'm mad as hell and not going to take it anymore," as you shouted out the window? What was it that brought you to this point?
It sounds like you were listening to what was happening with me, the way you described that. I've always been a fan of the Constitution of the United States. I mean, that's going really far back. So it's something I've always paid attention to, is our political system in Alaska. And yeah, there's been times when I've been really frustrated, and there's been times when I've thought, this is going better, this is going well. Well, in the last couple of years, it's been very aggravating. And I am not the kind of person to just kind of go on a slow burn. I don't like to be angry and frustrated. And so I started attending assembly meetings. I was just really very surprised at the way this assembly was making decisions completely, opposite of what I felt like was good for Anchorage. And so I started going to assembly meetings, and again, I was just pretty dumbfounded. I'd never seen a business or any group of people run that way.
Right.
It was several years ago that I started attending assembly meetings, and I just knew that things had to change. So I was pretty surprised that this liberal body had taken over in the biggest city in Alaska, which I consider a pretty conservative state. We've always leaned conservative. And so to be completely run by this body of people that didn't represent us in any way, I just couldn't take anymore. So I started talking to friends and family, and my family actually said, yeah, we knew you were going to run, and I think you're the last one to know. So, yeah.
Well, that's
so
good.
I jumped in. Yeah.
All right. Well, that's good. Well, let's find out a little bit more about Kathy Henslee. So, give us some of your background here. I mean, I kind of gave the thumbnail, but tell us a little bit about you and where you come from and what you bring to the table here.
Okay. Well, I am a lifelong Alaskan. I've been here my whole life. My father was a state trooper, and my mother was a business owner. We lived in a cabin on a dirt road up on Rabbit Creek Road, believe it or not. Back in the olden days, as my kids like to say, we raised a family, and I have always been an entrepreneur. I think our system of economy in America is, again, part of the freedoms that we enjoy, and I have really been involved in that for most of my adult life. One of the things that I got involved in early on is I helped to write and formulate the first charter school in Anchorage, which is now the Family Partnership Charter School, because I believe in educational choice. And we actually had a pretty good education system back then, but it didn't meet the needs of my family. And so we worked on that, got that passed. That's been a really wonderful thing for Anchorage. My 8-year-old grandson is enrolled in that school right now, which is pretty cool. And then later on, through some really, circumstances of life, I became involved in an organization called Priceless Alaska, which is an organization that is faith-based, nonprofit, and works with women who have been rescued from sex trafficking in Alaska. After volunteering with them for a while, I became the transitional housing coordinator and director, and also the program director for that organization. I worked with the FBI and APD Joint Task Force to work on the issue and crime of sex trafficking in Alaska. And in that role, I was fortunate enough to work with a lot of really wonderful people in Alaska that are actually trying to make changes. And a big part of that was the homeless issue. We worked with a lot of homeless issues and all of the social service programs. And, coming from a conservative perspective, my goal and the goal of that organization was to end those issues.
Right.
And to see the churning through of people, human beings in Alaska that are stuck in this situation, and really little practical help from our state and local government. And pretty much we know that's what happens when government takes over something. It's inefficient,
Sure.
It's expensive, and it's not personal. And so those are some of the experiences that I've had in life that helped me to have a different perspective for the assembly.
Well, and that brings us to the issues, and I think that's a good segue since you just were talking about homelessness. Let's continue on that. I mean, obviously, we've got a homeless problem here, and since Anchorage is the hub for many of the communities around the state, it seems like we end up with a lot of the problems being imported here, and we're not doing enough to, as you said, fix the problem. Government got involved, and as I said to Stephanie Taylor earlier this week, I believe part of the problem is now we've created a homelessness industry where there are businesses and organizations that are, profiting off this. And so they may say that they want to fix it, but it may not be the best thing for their bottom line. My argument for homelessness, because I don't really have a solution for it, unfortunately, is to find a city or an area that has dealt with it in a way that's positive and emulate that. Instead, we seem to be emulating what's happened in Seattle and Portland, and that's a real problem right now. So what should we be doing?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. There are places that have had success. But we continue to go back to the places that big government agencies have done these studies in and said, this is what we should do. But as rational people, we look at the results. And you're exactly right. The results in Seattle and Portland, San Francisco, they're terrible. That is not the results that we want. So why are we following the same programs that they're wanting us to follow? And, one thing, Michael, that I think is just such common sense is we've been doing this for years this way. We've thrown a ton of money at it, and our homeless population has exploded. Well, anyone can look at that formula and say, that's not what we want to do. Why are we continuing to do that? So every time I'm in any kind of forum with my opponent, her solution is always, well, we can find this pot of money and we can pull from this pot of money. If money was our solution, we would not have a homeless person on the street. So we know that's not working. Now, we can take a look at some things in Anchorage that have been positive. The Downtown Hope Center has been running in Anchorage. It's a faith-based organization. They make a lot of positive, they have a lot of positive influence in this particular area. They take no public money. And the Assembly has fought against this organization in ways that you would not believe, that they, here's this Downtown Hope Center who's actually making a difference in lives of people that we care about. And they bring a lawsuit against them because they won't let a violent transgender man into their women's sleeping section. And so the leadership of that organization had to stop doing what they were doing, spend time and money to fight the Assembly when the Assembly should be supporting them and looking at what they're doing and really emulating them.
Right.
Lots of frustrating things going on there that can be changed.
Right. Well, absolutely. And we've seen this drift. I mean, I moved down to the South Central area here about 8 years ago. And even from that time that I got here till today, we've seen this drift in government policies and in the makeup of the Assembly and everything else, to where now we started off fairly, in the middle, kind of equally balanced. And now we're on the full-blown progressive speed train. This is like the bullet train from Tokyo to Osaka. Towards these policies that they just absolutely, like you said, taking an organization that is doing a good job, having success, and then entangling them in all this lawsuits and everything else over something like that. It just seems like, we've kind of lost our collective minds.
Yes. And then to add insult to injury, the person who is supposed to be the expert on the Assembly, very, very left woman, her name is Meg Zolotel, who I'm running against. They hire her to be the interim director of the Coalition to End Homelessness and pay her, I've heard, between $150,000 and $250,000. Who's paying that? We're paying that. Who is supposed to be over that? The Assembly that she sits on. It's very fishy.
Yeah, no conflict of interest there, right? I mean, that's no big change there. Well, homelessness is a big issue. I mean, we just saw the article the other day talking about, the Sullivan Arena, $200,000 a day, and now we're finding out that FEMA may not be reimbursing the Assembly and the government, the citizens of Anchorage. They've spent upwards of $80 million, and they may be on the hook for 55 million of that when it's all said and done. I mean, on top of everything else they're already paying for. I mean, it's there's a lot of issues there, and the money it's just going to get worse.
Yes, the mismanagement of funds is absolutely astounding. Unless you talk to them individually, then you see they really have no concept of a budget. They have no concept that the money is limited. And that when they spend the money this way, that it has consequences. The consequences to taxpayers, which is actually what you just said. Our taxes are going to be going up again. Our property taxes went up on an average of 13% this year already, and now we're going to have, they're pushing these bonds through again, and then we're going to be on the hook for this FEMA money, which was mismanaged and spent. The reason that we're on the hook for it is because they spent it wrong. They didn't do what they were supposed to do with the money. And people in Anchorage feel that. That money was coming to Anchorage at a time when they've shut down small businesses, so small businesses are struggling. The government said that people didn't have to pay their rent, and so landlords are struggling. There's so many struggling families here, and they take that money and they say, oh, we've got this special interest that we like.
Right.
And so we're going to take that money that's supposed to help the residents of Anchorage. We're going to spend it the way we want, and then we're going to be penalized. But who's going to pay for it? The residents of Anchorage.
Right.
And they don't care.
Well, that's the politician's disease, Kathy, that we know better than you how to spend your money. I mean, somehow, some way, somehow, once we became elected officials, we received some kind of omniscient touch from God or something to be able to understand how you should run your life and spend your money and raise your children and everything else. That is the politician's disease. Yeah. We're going to continue here in just a moment. Kathy Henslee is our guest, Assembly candidate for the Anchorage Municipal Assembly for District 4. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll have more discussions with her. And we'll see where she just mentioned the bond issue, so I think that we should kind of dive into the bond issues as well as some of the other issues that she has outlaid on her website at hensleyforassembly.com, including opening up opening up the businesses in the community, public safety, small business. We'll talk with Kathy Henslee about those and more when we return. It is The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Back with more right after this.
We're broadcasting live through a series of tubes.
Allowing all of these entities to provide streaming stuff going on the internet.
Well, it's kind of hard to explain. Sorry. Streaming live every weekday morning on Facebook Live and MichaelDukesShow.com.
All right, we are in the break right now. Kathy Henslee is our guest, and we're talking with her about all kinds of stuff. We like to take Kathy, we like to kind of change subjects during the commercial break so we don't repeat ourselves too much for the podcast. So let's talk about briefly here just this leftward swing on the assembly and some of the things that you find the most egregious, violations or sins that this assembly has perpetrated on the citizens of the city of Anchorage here in the last 2 or 3 years. What are the things that have really stuck out for you?
Yeah, there's been several. One that has obviously hit the public very strongly is the mandates that they continually are trying to push through. Before Mayor Bronson came in, they had free reign and could do whatever they wanted. And so, the mask mandates for inside, outside, in businesses, and that was it was such an overreach. And then, of course, the way they arbitrarily decided which businesses were essential and which businesses they wanted to shut down. And it was so difficult for our business owners. And I live in Midtown. We have a lot of small businesses in this district and families, and it was very difficult. And they wouldn't listen. They would not hear the suffering that they were causing. They just turned a blind eye to what was happening because they wanted to do what they wanted to do. And so those things are some of the things that the people in my district talk about the most. Another thing that has been really just changed our quality of life is crime in Anchorage. Property crime and violent crime in Anchorage. We've always had terrible statistics in Alaska. But right now in Anchorage, it's just like the homeless problem. You don't need to do any research to see if our crime has gone up in Anchorage. It's well known. You do not take your family out on a lot of the trails. You don't go run on trails. You don't walk your baby to a park. The crime that we're experiencing here is overwhelming. A very sad thing that just happened is in our library where the assembly meets, a young woman was stabbed in the back and is now paralyzed. The media is hardly talking about it at all. And that was a man who had been charged with brutal crimes and let out because he was mentally unhealthy to stand trial. That is so against how we run our society, to protect everybody except for our residents who are living and working and raising families. Everybody in this city has precedence over the person that gets up in the morning, takes their children to school, and goes to work. And it really is lowering our quality of life to a point where people just don't want to take it anymore.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely frustrating. I mean, that story alone, the fact that he had been in custody just mere days before he stabbed this woman for attacking other people and for fighting back against, fighting police and everything else. And then the fact that they just let him out because he was mentally incompetent. And I mean, and then he goes on to do this. It's heartbreaking. It's terrifying and it's heartbreaking. One quick question. What are your thoughts on the fact that Meg Zaletel did not get recalled, and how is that shaping your campaign? I got about a minute here before we rejoin.
Okay. Yes. So I understand why the recall for Meg happened. The way that it was worded on the ballot was really unfortunate. But that's the system that we have, and we have to work within that. A recall has never worked in Alaska. I think we had one tribal leader that was recalled at one point. Other than that, there's never been a time when that has worked. I think that a lot of people didn't know about the recall, didn't care about the recall. A lot of people were very politically exhausted after what's been going on.
Right.
So I don't really think it's going to affect this race when you have a choice, such a clear choice.
Yeah.
I think people are going to make the right choice, which is to vote for me.
There you go. All right. Well, hold the line. We're going to jump back into it. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Kathy Henslee's our guest. Give us a share and a like. Okay, we're back now, continuing, discussing things with Kathy Henslee. Henslee for Assembly, that's HENSLEE for Assembly.com. She joins us. Before we went to break, we were talking a bit about some of her issues. We'd started off with homelessness, and she'd mentioned bonds, and so I think I need to bring this back into... Kathy, this is one of my pet peeves. I'll be honest with you. When I served on the Borough Assembly in Fairbanks, it was one of the things that I was most vociferous about. I was not a fan because, I mean, first of all, I think that, deferred maintenance, there's a special place in hell for the guy who thought that thing up. But yet we see it time and time again where they've used deferred maintenance. They take those monies, they use it on something else instead of maintaining what they need, and then they bond for it later on for a 20-year bond to fix something that they should have been working on the whole time. Here we are, $56 million in bonds for the city, or 46 rather, and then $111 million in bonds for the school district. Now, the city's at least kind enough to break it up into various bonds for each different project, but the school, they just lump it all together. And $111 million, including a brand new school at a time when they've got an 8% decrease in enrollment in the Anchorage school district. I don't understand this.
Well, you and me both. It shows you how little they understand economics, and how they believe government is the solution to everything. And so we should just turn our money over to them so that they can run things better than we do. They really do think that.
Yeah.
It's just appalling how this continues to happen. I too think the way that we do bonds doesn't make sense for our city. Economically, it's a disaster. But the bottom line for me is Anchorage spends too much money. We continue to spend more and more money. Our city budget has grown 20% in the last several years, 20%, and our residents have decreased by 15,000 people. And then I can't even start talking about the school board and the school bonds and the Anchorage School District, they just asked for $900 million for a school system that's failing miserably and losing students.
Yeah.
It's so it just blows your mind.
Right. It is mind-boggling. I mean, the fact that they continue to do that. I mean, again, going back to just the whole new school thing, $30 million for a new school. They'll be into it for almost $34 million because they already had bonded nearly $4 million for the planning and design and everything. And they're just going to be like, here it is. We need a new school, but you have 8% less students, and it looks like it's probably going to continue to drop. That's okay. We still need it. It's for the children after all. And that's the continued argument. I mean, and they've already said that the school district is going to be doing this on a biennial basis. So every 2 years, you're going to see another $100 million bond dropped in your lap. I mean, that just can't continue.
No, it can't continue. You know, Michael, it reminds me of talking to someone's 24-year-old son living in their basement about them wanting to go on vacation and buy a new car. You just look at that person and you think you have no idea of what the reality of life is, and it's really it's just outrageous.
Yeah.
We need to stop spending so much money. Now, obviously, when I say that, I'm not saying we don't work on infrastructure and we don't do the things that the basic things that the city should be doing. But we've gotten so far away from the basic things that this city should be doing. We need to pull back. We need to reprioritize. And that's one of the things that we've really noticed about this assembly. Their priorities are nothing like our priorities. And you see that in the way they spend money. And then they spend money frivolously, and then they actually bring some things forward, maintenance. Well, these things actually do need to be done. But we don't have the money to do them because you have spent all our money on these frivolous things that we're not interested in. And their solution is always find more money.
Right.
If you talk to them, they will say, well, Anchorage needs to find more money. No, we don't.
Right.
We don't need to find more money.
It's a microcosm of what's going on in the legislature. Do we have a revenue problem or do we have a spending problem?
Exactly.
And I think, nobody is willing to acknowledge that we are like teenagers with a credit card. And, we just keep going. Let's go back to the issues. You talked about it briefly, about businesses that were affected by the lockdowns and everything else. You just talked about that during the break. But, I mean, opening up is one of your issues. You say open up.
Yes.
You're a firm believer in individual rights. You believe that, this has been a difficult couple of years. What are your thoughts on opening up and staying open in the midst of, the COVID stuff and everything else?
Right. I believe in people. I think people make the best decisions for their own lives. I think that the entrepreneurial spirit is something that needs to be encouraged and developed. And we can have a thriving economy. The people in Alaska, we are individualists, and we like to make things work the way we want them to work. And so that just lends a hand to opening businesses. Anchorage, the way we are positioned in the world, the resources that we have access to, the people that live here, we should be an economic powerhouse in the United States of America. And we're not. And we're not because of bad policies. We're not because the government is on our backs and regulating every single thing we do and slowing us down. The permitting process is out of control. We can't have development, which we need desperately. And it's the government that is putting a lid on all of these things. We need to get the government off our back, as I said, and open up for business. Industries would come here. People would come here. We need to be attractive to people opening businesses and knowing that they can succeed here.
No, I agree. And of course, we've seen the effect, in Anchorage versus in other communities where they not only remained open, but they announced publicly that they were open for business. I live in Wasilla, and I always found it interesting that on the weekends, the drive, especially on a Friday night, going back home was horrible because and I talked to restaurant owners in Wasilla, and they're like, yeah, we're full. Every Friday, we're full because people were driving from Anchorage to go solicit and go patronize businesses out in the valley because all the places in town were shut down, and it was a major blow to the economy in Anchorage.
Yes, it was. I mean, my husband and I did the same thing. You just had to get out of Anchorage so you could breathe for a minute and, remember what real life is like. And I don't want to ever go through that again. That is not something I ever want to experience again. I think that was one of the things that made me the most incredulous about this assembly, that they would close people's businesses down without any understanding of what that meant to their families.
Yeah,
it's outrageous.
Well, you do mention on your website public safety, and it says it's time we support our law enforcement and allow them to do their job. If Anchorage continues to ignore the needs of our police department, we'll be on track with cities like Seattle and Portland. What do you mean by that? What is not being done and what should be being done with our law enforcement or with the law enforcement down in the municipality there?
Yeah, I think this is a leadership problem. The leadership that we have been living under with this assembly has not cared about the citizens of Anchorage and their public safety. It's always been about the public safety of the criminals. And we need to shift that thinking. We need to support our police department and our prosecutors, and we need to enforce the laws that are on the books. And if we turned that around, everything in Anchorage would get better very quickly. I know the police are frustrated with their hands being tied because they're not supported. And when you're not doing a job where you're not supported and you're not looked at as the good guy, you're not looked at as someone that we care about and that is a priority to us, we can just see the results in Anchorage, and we need to change it, and we need to change it quickly.
Are you in favor of the changes? I know some of the changes that are coming up include body cams and some of the other things. Is that part of the solution? Is there other things that need to be done? What are your thoughts?
The body cam issue is it's an interesting issue. My thoughts are we need to support what is best for the police. Is that where they want money spent? Is that protection for them also? I think that a big part of that body cam push is looking at our police as suspect. And I'm not interested in projecting that. I trust our police. I think that one or two bad apples can't be tolerated, but they can't also paint a picture of a police force that's doing a really good job for us.
Right. Well, it's the whole thing of honesty is the best policy. And as we've seen across the country, there's been many instances in large towns and in small of there are bad apples, and unfortunately, they don't weed them out of the barrel. And you always hear that there's a few bad apples in every barrel. They never finish that, basically saying that if you don't take the bad apples out, they'll spoil the whole barrel. And so exactly. I think a little transparency and a little, again, that little Jiminy Cricket on your shoulder, knowing that what's going down will keep honest people honest and keep those who are not honest at least a little bit more on the straight and narrow. I don't personally have a problem with it. What are some of the other issues you think that are facing our public safety there in Anchorage that need to be addressed?
Well, I think one of the big issues is separating the idea of homelessness from crime. A segment of this homeless population are criminals, and they need to be dealt with as criminals. We can't look at them and say, oh, they're homeless, so they're not under the law.
So they get a pass, right? They get a pass.
They should not get a pass.
Yeah.
And so to say this segment of this segment of our population is going to be treated, then another segment of our population isn't working for us. Once we get a handle on that, that's going to take care of a chunk of that population right away. And it's also going to make it more clear who's dealing with mental illness, who is dealing with actual economic issues, which is a small portion, who's dealing with drug and alcohol issues, and who are these, how do we get in there and treat these people as individuals? When the criminal element is in there so thick and intertwined so much, we really need to be able to look at that and say, we can't just ignore that.
We all acknowledge that a huge component of the homelessness issue and everything surrounding it is mental health, and yet we have no solution for that in this state or in many other states. That essentially, since they shut down a lot of the mental health institutions and asylums and things in the 80s, we've seen this explosion of homelessness because instead of finding other solutions, they just basically put everybody out on the street, and there you go. And that's a big part of our problem. We're offering solutions to some of these people, but they're just not in a state mentally where they either want or willing to or can accept it. And we've got to find some way to fix that.
Right. That's absolutely right. And it's heartbreaking for people who have loved ones on the street, who cannot get any help, who really, would advocate for people that are struggling because it's an illness and it can be helped. And there are things that we can do. And to just say, well, they have a right to be homeless and they have a right to, walk around on the streets talking to themselves and accosting people. That's not a good way to live. It's not the way we want people to be surviving in Anchorage, Alaska.
Kathy Henslee is our guest. I want to give you a chance to finish up here, Kathy, but I just realized I'm running late for the break. So I'm going to put you back on hold, and we're going to come back to you here in just a hot minute, and we'll give you a chance to summate and finish up and give your elevator pitch. So get your notes out. You're going to give us your elevator pitch for why people should vote for Kathy Henslee. We're going to continue in just a moment. The Michael Duke Show continues. It is a great day. Another day on the right side of the grass. That's all we could say. We'll continue with Kathy Henslee and finish things up here in just a moment. The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio.
What is that?
Common sense. Regularly heard on American radio. Michael Duke Show. Radio.
All right, we're in the break right now with Kathy Henslee. And let me go to the chat room, see if there's any questions that I can ask from the chat room. Let's see. People talking about the homelessness and living in Fairbanks. I could never understand. I mean, having lived in Fairbanks for 45 years, I could never understand people being homeless in Fairbanks because that just sounds like a hard. I'd rather get a job. You know what I mean?
Amen, brother.
Yeah. That sounds like a hard thing. But again, sometimes it's circumstance. Sometimes, like I said, it's mental health or illness. Mm-hmm. It's not like they necessarily choose to do that, but at some point it becomes a choice when you don't want to take the help that's offered to you. That's part of the problem. Trying to address crime without reforming our pathetic justice system is just peeing into the wind. And I agree with part of that. I mean, that's what the whole impetus behind SB 91 was, right? They wanted to try and fix it, found out that it didn't work, then they had to fight to get it back, and yet we still have the same crime problem that we're having today.
Yeah, it's so true. It's so true. When you have law enforcement and you have prosecutors, and then you get in front of these judges, and exactly what happened. I mean, I hate to keep coming back to it, but that man who was just let off.
Yeah,
that is so harmful to our society, and we do need to address that. And that's one of those issues that feels a little just impossible to address because of the way our judges are appointed, and we definitely need to work on that. We can see the effect it's having. Judicial
reform, which again is a state issue, not a municipality issue, but I mean, we're all affected by it. And it's not, I understand it's almost necessary to go back to this last attack at the library because it's so heinous. It's so, right there, they had him in their hands. They let him go. He can't stand trial. Well, wait, he's dangerous. He's been accused of all these things, and yet you just drop him back out on the street. That makes no sense whatsoever. I don't even know what to say to that. It's flabbergasting.
It is, exactly. And you think about, the poor woman, her 4 children, her family that was stabbed, her life has completely changed. The woman that he attacked, that he was originally arrested for right before then, what about her? There's no justice for her either. So her rights are less important. That family's rights are less important than that man. It's not okay.
Chuck says, bonds are the result of bad decisions made by those in charge, yet people sign on to those bonds and accept the costs. It's like we're wearing blindfolds. And, I couldn't disagree with that. I think that that's 100% true. And yet we continue to hear the stories of, oh, don't worry, do the bonds, we'll be reimbursed, especially like the school bonds, we'll be reimbursed, 70, 80, 90% until we're not, of course.
Exactly.
And then what do you do?
And who's paying for those reimbursements?
Yeah.
It all comes out of our pocket.
Exactly.
And the way they push it, and, they make it sound so nice. But if you logically look at budgeting and economics, it makes no sense.
Yeah. No, it's definitely frustrating to watch, and I definitely like to see a change in the assembly. We've got a chance here. There's 5 people up for election. Are you guys working kind of together to try and create a block where we can bring some balance back?
We are, and it's a good slate of candidates. We've been working well together. Of course, we're in our individual districts, so we've got our own campaigns. But, think about it, Michael. If we change these 5 seats in April, we will have an immediate majority. That has not happened in a long time. The things that we could tackle and the things that we can work with Mayor Bronson, we could make some actual changes in Anchorage that will affect our families and our businesses right away.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it would be a big change. I'm hoping that there's enough, we saw Mayor Bronson get elected, and I know that there's been a lot of criticism of Save Anchorage and some of the groups of people who are just frustrated. But I am amazed at the number of people who are in some of these groups who come from a diverse background who have basically said enough is enough. I mean, politically, left, right, and center have all said, that they're here to try and save it. And it's been, like I said, it's been kind of castigated, but it's a strong group, and there may be enough of a groundswell to make some of those changes.
I agree with you, and I talk to those people all the time. I talk to people who say, I've never paid attention before. I'm talking to people all the time who say, I've always voted for Democrats. I'm talking to a lot of people that are recognizing that what we are doing is not working and we need a change.
Right.
And so I'm very hopeful. I think that we're going to, that we have a good chance of turning over these 5 seats. And I'm just very excited about what we're going to be able to accomplish in Anchorage.
Kathy Henslee is our guest, candidate for Anchorage Assembly, District 4. Folks, please like and share this video. Like and follow the show page as well. If you would also, if you're on YouTube, make sure you hit the subscribe button and ring the bell. We're going to jump back into it here. One final segment with Kathy Henslee, The Michael Duke Show. Common Sense Radio. All right, we're back, finishing things up. Kind of ran out of time in the last segment there. I always like to give the candidates a chance to kind of summate and stuff, but we were just talking about, during the break, we were talking about the election and how this election is probably one of the most important ones that's happened in Anchorage in a long time. There's 5 assembly seats up, and Kathy was just saying there are good, strong candidates, more conservative candidates in all 5 of those seats that are up for election. And if they all get elected, it would create an immediate conservative majority in the assembly. So now is the most important time for listeners in the South Central area to be paying attention and to go out and actually vote. Mm-hmm. Kathy?
Yes, that's right. And, our elections, I hear the frustration from people about how the elections have been run in the past. I've spent a lot of time down at Election Central looking at how they're doing things. And, the solution is to not throw our hands up in the air and say we can't get it done. The solution is to overwhelmingly put our ballots in. And that's what we need to do. Anyone that is dissatisfied with the way Anchorage has been run for several years, if you would fill out the ballot for the 5 candidates and 2 school board candidates that we have that are running the school board is a major issue, and that's Mark Anthony Cox and Rachel Rice. And then the 5 of us, Kathy Henslee, Stephanie Taylor, Kevin Cross, Liz Vasquez, and Randy Salt, we would have an immediate majority. With the mayor and the citizens of Anchorage, we could make some changes and make Anchorage a wonderful place to live again. I love Anchorage. I'm not ready to give up on Anchorage. I won't give up on Anchorage, and I know that we can do it.
Well, and I know that, as you mentioned, there is a bit of people are weary. I mean, people are, they're wore out. I mean, they were wore out politically, from the elections, from the continual polarization, the divisiveness that we see on the national level, which kind of sucks all the oxygen out of the room. And sometimes we fail to pay attention to what's going on in our own backyard. And we're just so damn tired, Kathy.
Yeah.
I mean,
I totally agree, and especially conservatives, because we are very busy living great lives. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We really embrace that, and we should. But that's not the way the left runs it. This is a career for them. They are very organized, and they have a plan, and the plan is to take over and do things according to their agenda, and they have succeeded in Anchorage. And we just don't have the luxury anymore of saying someone else will do it. We've got to vote. We've got to get out there and knock on doors, make phone calls, gather your friends, ask them if they're satisfied. If they're not satisfied, would you be willing to, fill out your ballot and send it in to make a change for Anchorage?
And, of course, again, the old do not grow weary in well-doing kind of tripe. That's what we need to remember, that, yes, I mean, they wear us down. It is a profession for them. We've seen many use assembly positions and school board positions as stepping stones to higher office. And most of the people who are on the more conservative side, they're not interested in being professional politicians. And I think that's the major difference.
Yes, we don't look at government as the end-all be-all. We look at government as a tool to organize our community and, help us to get out of our way and keep our roads going. That's not the way the left looks at the government. The government, they would like, us to turn our money over to them so that they can spend it on what they know is better than for us than we know. They're going to take care of us. We don't want them taking care of us. So we don't need to look at the government as a solution, but we do need to look at the government as something that needs to be taken care of.
Right.
We need to take care of this institution that we have in our political system. It is a good system, but it won't be a good system if we're not involved.
Well, you've seen it across the state of Alaska. People get so caught up in all the national pooshwa that they can't do a single thing about, whether it's Orange Man bad or politics or election mischief or whatever's going around. They all focus on that, and they lay by the wayside. They let their city councils and their borough assemblies slip away from them. Places that were traditionally more red than blue or even more red than purple are now, we've got, look at down in the Mat-Su, up in the Mat-Su, where we've got, one of the reddest boroughs in the whole state, and yet they've got an assembly that is heavily progressive until it just got recently switched over. We're not paying attention to the important part, the stuff that's closest to home.
That's right. And it affects our everyday life. And that's what I continually hear is, okay, now I really have to get involved. I really don't want to get involved, but I need to because it's affecting my children
right.
and my business and my family. And so they're coming out and I appreciate it. I'm grateful that we're banding together to make Anchorage better.
Yeah. Kathy Henslee, our guest, candidate for Municipal Assembly in Anchorage District 4. I want to give you a couple minutes here, Kathy, for your elevator pitch. Kathy Henslee's here. She's stuck in the elevator with you. She's got to tell you why she is the candidate versus her opponent or anybody else. Why should people do that, and how can they get a hold of you? Give us the full pitch here, Kathy.
Thanks, Michael. Yes, if you're dissatisfied with the way things have been run in Anchorage for several years and would like a change, I am that change. I bring a conservative point of view, conservative values and principles, and I am interested in growing Anchorage back into a wonderful place to live. my website is hensleyforassembly.com. We have a fantastic organization, which is really indicative of how I plan on working in this city, by bringing in amazing people that do an amazing job. And so if you would be interested in joining our campaign, we would love to have you. We go out and knock on doors, and we make phone calls, and we have events and rallies and sign waving. And we've organized a large group of people to be poll watchers, and we're organizing that with every conservative candidate for Assembly, and it's a well-run organization right now. So if you'd like to be part of it, we would love to have you. Get on my website and sign up. Come to an event. I'm at Sip Coffee on Tudor every Saturday from 9 to 10, and then we go out door knocking from 10 to 1. And then on Wednesdays, I'm at Little Dipper Diner on Diamond from noon to 12. Noon to 1. And I just invite anybody who has a question or would like to, talk to me and see if I might be the candidate for you. I would love to meet you. And thank you for being involved in this wonderful city.
Kathy Henslee, Anchorage Assembly candidate, District 4, hensleyforassembly.com. Kathy, good luck. We hope that you get a lot of support, and we hope that people have been convinced or have heard about it, or at least will share this with their friends and relatives later on the replay or on the podcast. We need to get more folks like you in there. So thank you for coming on board. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Michael. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Well,
thank you.
Always happy to oblige. That's what I want to do here. So thank you so much for coming on board. All right. Folks, this is my final thoughts here as we get ready to wrap up the show today. What Kathy and I were just talking about is probably the biggest detriment to the more conservative side of the equation. The liberals, the progressives, they're very much a kumbaya communal mentality, right? It takes a village, et cetera, et cetera. And so they get a little bit of that bump of esprit de corps. Oh, we're all part of it. We're all part of something greater. It's part of that narrative that I talk about, that only through the benevolent intervention of government can society move forward. And so, on the other side of it is those of us who are more rugged individualists, and, we kind of fight back against being part of a group. We kind of fight back against, being told what to do. We kind of fight back against that. And while I admire that, there are times when we need to come together, and we definitely need to come together right now. We definitely need to come together right now and make a difference in Anchorage, down in Anchorage. Also, in this fall, in the in the general elections, the ranked choice voting, all that. We've got to do these things, folks. We cannot grow weary in well-doing. We stop paying attention to all the stuff that's going on at the national level that you can't do a thing about. You want to make a difference in your community. Make a difference in your city council, your road service area, your community council, your borough assembly. Make those differences. And be kind. Live well. Love one another. We'll see you tomorrow, folks. Jill says the biggest problem is that many are talkers, but too few are doers willing to step in and roll up the sleeves and do the job, and they think they can't, or they think they can. It's human nature. You see it over and over again in all aspects of life, but we make a difference when we become doers, and it starts from the ground up in the smallest organizations and committees, etc. Get involved and become a doer. It matters more than you know, and that's the best way to finish up the day, because that's exactly it. You can't just talk about it. You can't just gripe about it. You've got to do something. And I know it's tiring. I know you're sick of it. I know it's frustrating. But don't give up. That's how they win. Right? Don't let the bastards grind you down. I can't remember the Latin phrase for it, but that's the English translation. Don't let the bastards grind you down. All right, my friend. We will see you tomorrow for Firearms Friday, the Michael Duke Show, Common Sense Radio.
Goodbye.
We've shed our terrestrial radio skin, and now we are slimy lizard internet people. It's the Michael Duke Show.